In our last video, we were talking about how to solve linear inequalities, how to write our answer in interval notation, and how to solve double inequalities. In this video, we want to see how to solve absolute value inequalities. Now, there are two types of absolute value inequalities. If you have the absolute value on the left-hand side and you have a less than symbol, that's called a conjunction. That's an and statement because negative a is less than x and x is less than a at the same time. If your absolute value is on the left and you have a greater than symbol, then that's a disjunction. A disjunction is an or statement that negative a is greater than x or x is greater than a, but not both. So an easy way to remember whether it's a conjunction or a disjunction is see how your less than symbol looks like the letter C. So that's an easy way to remember the conjunction. And in English, the most common part of speech conjunction is usually and. All right, then for your greater than symbol, if you draw a line right here, see how that looks like a capital D? So that might help you remember that greater than is the disjunction. If you disjoin two things, you break them apart, that would be an or statement. Now, I always struggle with remembering these formulas. I don't memorize well. And, you know, sometimes it's positive, sometimes it's negative, sometimes it's greater than, sometimes it's less than. So here's a little trick that an engineer showed me that is a way that you can remember those formulas, or a way that you can do every single absolute value inequality problem you'll ever see without even having to know the formulas. All right, so here is that little trick. You're going to take exactly what you see. X is less than a, so you're going to copy exactly what you have. Then you're going to copy the same sign, less than, and you're going to copy the opposite of that number. Now, that doesn't seem any easier to remember than just remembering the formula. But the thing is, it works on both types. It works on every absolute value I'm going to see, instead of me having to memorize. If it's this type, I use this formula, and if it's this type, I use this formula. Let me show you what we're talking about over here. So again, I'm going to copy exactly what I've got. I'm going to copy the same sign, and I'm going to copy the opposite number. So the only thing that I'll have to remember is what we've already talked about. The fact that if it looks like a C, that's a conjunction, that's an and statement. I leave that one altogether. If it looks like the D, the greater than symbol, it looks like the D, that's a disjunction. I'm going to have to break that apart into two separate pieces. All right, so let's look at this first example. We're going to take exactly what we've got. X minus 5 is less than 2. We're going to copy the same sign, and we're going to copy the opposite number. Now, this is an and statement because remember, this is the one that looks like the C, the conjunction, so that's an and statement. If you want to, as we did earlier with the double inequality, if you want to break that into two separate pieces, you can, and then just put it back together at the end. But you also can work with it as it is and just say, okay, if I want to get x by itself, I'm going to add 5. So I need to add 5 here and here and here. All right, so if I add 5, I'm going to end up with 3 is less than x is less than 7. So our interval notation, remember that your lowest value is going to be on the left. So 3 is our lowest value. And your highest value is going to be on the right. So 7 is our highest value. Also remember that because we have less than with each of these, when you have less than, you use the parenthesis. So we're going to put a parenthesis with the 3 and the 7. If we wanted to graph that, we would have a parenthesis at 3, a parenthesis at 7, and we'd be shading the values in between. All right, look at another one of those. We've got the absolute value of x minus 5 is greater than 2. So let's copy exactly what we have. Copy the same sign and the opposite number. Now this one, if we draw the straight line here, that one looks like the D, so that reminds us this is the disjunction. This is the or statement. I have to break it into two separate pieces. And so I'm going to add 5 to both sides. And over here, I'm going to add 5 to both sides. Also, if you think about it, if we're saying that x has to be less than 3, so 3 is greater than x or x is less than 3, however you want to read that. If we're saying that x has got to be less than 3 and x has got to be greater than 7, it can't be less than 3 and greater than 7 at the same time. So again, that would help us remember that this is supposed to be an or statement. Okay, so I'm going to need interval notation for this piece and for this piece. So let's start with this one. If 3 is greater than x, then 3 is going to be my largest value. And then we're going to keep getting smaller and smaller and smaller, so we're going to go to negative infinity. And again, because we didn't have an equal to here, we're going to use a parenthesis with the 3. We would always use a parenthesis with infinity or negative infinity. All right, for the second piece over here, x is greater than 7. 7 is our smallest value, and we're using all the values greater than that, so that would go to positive infinity. Again, always use a parenthesis with infinity or negative infinity, and because this didn't have an equal to, we use a parenthesis with the 7. Now, to join those two answers together, we're going to use a symbol from geometry. It was the union symbol. And so we're going to write the first piece united with the second piece. If we were going to graph that, we would have a parenthesis at 7 shading the values above, and a parenthesis at 3 shading the values below. So again, just like you have two separate interval notations, you have two separate pieces on the graph. So while we've been talking about absolute value today, I would encourage you to think about what is absolute in your life. What are the things that you can always count on, the people that are always there for you? You know, I'd like to think that you have some adults in your life, whether it's parents or grandparents or guardians or coaches or student pastors or someone who is always there for you. Hopefully you have some friends that you can depend on. But as much as I love my husband and my children and I want to be the absolute best for them I possibly can be, I'm going to make mistakes and I'm going to let them down. And we've all had friends hurt us and disappoint us. The good thing is that God is always there for us, that God is an absolute that we can depend on. In John 14:6, he says, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No man comes to the Father except through me. He is the absolute truth, the one and only way. You know, my pastor recently was talking about Psalms 23, and he said, what if you couldn't depend on God? What if when you read Psalm 23, one of the most comforting and encouraging passages in the Bible, what if it said, the Lord is not my shepherd, so I will always be in need. He doesn't walk beside me when I go through the deepest, darkest valleys. I am completely alone. What if we couldn't depend on God? It really helps us realize how blessed we are that God is always there for us, that He is an absolute that we can always depend on no matter what.